Now, I do not mean to be offensive at all, but some of these numbers honestly just do not make sense. Like age 10 for wrinkles and age 14 for texture. Like I can look at him and tell that he does not have the skin of a preteen. He has been open about doing cosmetic treatments. That makes it difficult to know if when you're looking at him, you're seeing the effects of his anti-aging protocol or the effects of the cosmetic procedures that he's done. If the blueprint protocol can actually reverse aging, then let us see that. Like we're all watching to see if this guy can actually fly. And in this case, flying would be him waking up one day and actually looking just like his 18-year-old son. He is spending $2 million a year and a significant chunk of his waking hours on this protocol. I should also mention that he has a whole clinic in his house with an ultrasound machine. So this money is basically going towards giving more years of life to the people who already live the longest. There is so much work to do to narrow the gaps in health outcomes between people in this country. That is a problem that deserves the attention of anyone whose mission it is to help people not die. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about Bryan Johnson and his $2 million a year mission to extend his time on Earth indefinitely. If you haven't come across him yet, he is famous for wanting to live forever and using both established and experimental ways to achieve his goal. Also, last month, Netflix released a documentary about him. After watching the documentary, I immediately went to his website and YouTube page to learn more about what he was doing, and I figured it'd be worth it to share my thoughts here. So today I'll be sharing two perspectives that I've developed with regards to Bryan Johnson's blueprint protocol. First, I will share my scientific perspective, which will be an analysis of the data that he is collecting and also of the scientific message that he's communicating. And second, I'll be sharing my public health perspective, where I'll talk about what actual value I think his project could have for society at large. All right, so let's start with the first one. Even if you do not like this guy, which would be very hard to do because he seems very affable and sincere, you have to admit that what he is doing is fascinating. I would guess that north of 90% of the people watching his videos don't actually think he's going to live forever, but it's still fun to watch someone go to great lengths to achieve the impossible, or at least try to. Humans have always been fascinated with avoiding death, as evidenced by the numerous fairy tales and epics that have survived the test of time. I think Bryan is just the most recent and most public example of that we have in the modern day. While it might sound nonsensical, the question of whether or not we can expand our lifespans and be like gods is not entirely baseless. We know that humans live and die like pretty much everything else on this planet, but there are some animals that appear to have biological immortality. For example, the so-called immortal jellyfish can reach its sexually mature medusa form, where it looks like what you think of when you picture a jellyfish, and then when faced with stressful environmental conditions like a drastic temperature change, it can revert back to its sexually immature polyp stage, where it looks like Beaker from the Muppet Show, and essentially start its life cycle all over again. It can do this when it gets sick in order to heal itself, and it can also do this when it gets very old as a way for it to be young again. Researchers are studying their genome to understand how they repair their DNA and reprogram their cells, and how this knowledge can be used to repair cell damage in humans. But we are far from being able to do any sort of jellyfish-like hard reset on our cells. That's because this jellyfish is nothing like us. It's very tiny, less than half an inch at its widest point, does not have a complex nervous system with a brain or a heart or bones like humans do. Jellyfish also eat and poop through the same hole, so they are vastly different from us. But understanding how they do this can be useful for helping us to understand our own aging process at the DNA level. Bryan wishes, I'm sure, that he had the DNA of this jellyfish, but he does not. So instead, he is experimenting on himself using scientifically proven ways to expand his lifespan, like eating healthy and exercising, as well as some methods that have not been shown to be effective in the long term in humans or even primates. So just to give you a sense of what exactly he's doing, every day, Bryan wakes up at 5 a.m., stands in front of a bright light, checks his inner ear temperature, measures his body composition, does a couple of hair treatments, takes 100+ pills, does red and near infrared light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, focused shockwave therapy, exercises, does his work stuff in between, and he has his last meal at 11 a.m. He has also tried gene therapy, stem cell injections, and perhaps most controversially, blood plasma transfusions, where he took plasma from his own son and had it put into his body. It's his body and he can experiment with it the way that he wants to, but I do have some qualms with the way that he communicates the message of what he's doing sometimes. I'm gonna go over to his blueprint website and show you exactly what I mean. Okay, so first, I have a problem with this statement right here. World's best longevity protocol powered by precision evidence doses to enhance your energy, cognition, and overall well-being. My first question is, how does he know that this is the world's best longevity protocol? I thought the purpose of this whole N of 1 experiment was to figure out what the best protocol would be, implying that we don't know what that is yet. So why is he claiming that he already knows that this protocol will work?
This is the very first time in human history where you can say with a straight face, you may not die.
You believe that?
Oh, there's no question.
The only proven protocol for longevity, based on observation and not clinical trials, of course, is to 1, have good genetics, but we can't control that. So we'll move on to 2, be active. 3, be a part of a community, or at least have some people that you can depend on. 4, try not to stress out too much. 5, get enough sleep. 6, don't smoke. And 7, to eat a healthy diet, which would consist mostly of plant foods, although meat and dairy in moderation are fine as well. Just a reminder that people in the blue zones, where there are the highest concentrations of centenarians in the world, are not primarily vegetarian or even vegan. They all consume animal products to some degree. I have an old video on the topic of veganism where I talk about this, so I'll be sure to link that video somewhere in the description. Oh, and there is one more factor that must be included on any good longevity protocol, and that is to have money. If you want to live a long life, it helps to be higher up on the income spectrum. According to the World Bank Group, the countries with the longest life expectancies are the People's Republic of China, specifically the special administrative regions of Macau and Hong Kong, where the average life expectancies are 85 years and 84 years respectively. Liechtenstein with an average of 84 years, Japan 84 years, French Polynesia 84 years, Switzerland 83 years, Faroe Islands 83 years, Australia 83 years, Sweden 83 years, and Spain also 83 years. These are not the wealthiest countries, but they're all considered advanced economies with the exception of French Polynesia, which is still considered a high income economy. Conversely, all of the countries with the shortest life expectancies are in some of the poorest regions of the world. Within the United States, you can see the same trend. Wealth is positively correlated with longevity. So until he makes it to 200 years old, I don't feel like it's fair for him to say that this is the best longevity protocol. Continuing with the same sentence, he also claims that this protocol is powered by precision evidence doses. But precise for who? Like, who is this precise for? As a dietitian, when I give nutrition recommendations to people, I need to know a lot about them before I can even get in the realm of being precise. Nutrition needs are generally calculated using someone's height, weight, age, whether they're male or female, their activity level, any medications that they're taking or medical conditions that they could have that may affect their metabolism, and so forth. If you want to get really precise, you would have to have knowledge of that person's genome as well as their epigenome, which affects how their genes get expressed, and their gut microbiome, which affects how they metabolize everything that they put into their bodies. When I click on the link to purchase the Blueprint protocol, it takes me to one generic combination of capsules, powders, soft gels, and olive oil. Nothing in the pack stands out as harmful, but I just don't like how it's marketed as being precise. In this video clip, he brings up this same criticism of the protocol only being precise for him and makes the claim that it's not just precise to him because it is based on population level data.
One of the most common responses I get is people say, but that's personalized to you. Actually, it's not. The amount of personalization I do at Blueprint is pretty small. There are some things which I share on my website, which I've done based upon my individual results, but these things are based upon population level studies. People overweight personalization and underweight population level studies.
I still don't agree. The national dietary guidelines are based on population level data, and that's why you will see that they have specific tiers for different people based on their calorie needs, e.g. if you need a 1600 calorie diet or a 2400 calorie diet. There is no recommendation in the Blueprint protocol to adjust the quantities up or down for different calorie levels. It's just one size fits all. In the video, he also says that thousands of people have tried this protocol and gotten similar results, but this is an unfounded claim. Unless he invited all of these people to his house to have them collect the same thousands of data points that he collects to see how the protocol affects his body, he cannot possibly know what types of results they're having. The only results being shown here are weight loss, which does not prove that the protocol is de-aging these people. Bryan and his team couldn't possibly know how any of these pills and powders would precisely impact anyone besides Bryan. To understand how the individual elements of this protocol would affect anyone who is not Bryan, we would need clinical trials. Now, when it comes to nutrients, the recommended intakes for men and women can actually be different. That's why you have men's and women's multivitamins. Nutrient recommendations also vary by age. So I'm going to use iron as an example. You can see here that daily a 30-year-old female would need 18 milligrams, while a 30-year-old male would need 8 milligrams. Also, there's really no need to take specific vitamins unless you have a deficiency or are at high risk of having a deficiency. Taking a multivitamin in general is pretty harmless, but it is possible to overdo it with vitamins. You should also be aware of the fact that some nutrients can actually antagonize each other as they compete for the same enzymes. So you really shouldn't just be taking vitamins for the sake of taking them. Another issue I have is with the protein powder. So why make a blanket recommendation that people take protein powder without knowing how much protein they're actually eating? It's actually false to assume that most people aren't getting enough protein. Most Americans already consume enough protein, and the average guy actually consumes more protein than is necessary. There is only so much protein that your body can absorb in a day, so taking extra protein when you don't actually need it is just going to give your kidneys extra work for no good reason. He is also taking over 100 pills a day and has experimented with medications like acarbose, rapamycin, and metformin, things that you would need a prescription for. These are not things that you can just get at your local CVS or Walgreens, which contributes to why I don't feel like this protocol is accessible to most people, but more on that later. Now, I will point out that on his website in fine print, there is a disclaimer which states that you should consult your own personal physician for any of your health needs. But I still feel like his broader message of doing this to be a pioneer for all of humanity can kind of overshadow those sorts of disclaimers. As I was scrolling on his website, this video popped up. I'll let it play and then I'll talk about it.
Hi friends, I'm going to show you how to prepare the Blueprint Stack. 74 powerful health interventions built on over 1,000 clinical trials.
Okay, so in this video, he claims that the Blueprint protocol is based on 1,000 clinical trials. This is obviously meant to grab your attention and create a sense of authority and trust, as he is telling you that this protocol is based on a large body of evidence. My problem here is that he doesn't state what types of clinical trials these are. Like, are we talking about animal studies or human studies? The type of trials I feel should be stated. Instead, those details are relegated again to the fine print on his website that most people are not going to read. This distinction is important because results in animal studies do not always translate to humans. There is another area of the website in fine print where he provides details on what types of studies him and his team used to come up with the Blueprint protocol, and they are transparent about some of these studies being animal studies and not having been tested in humans. But again, that's in the fine print that most people are never going to read. Rat studies are done to test hypotheses and get a sense of what may happen in humans, but we're obviously not rats, so clinical trials in humans carry a different weight. Just seeing 1,000 clinical trials without any qualifiers could make people think that these were all clinical trials in humans, which would imply that the things that he's testing out on himself have been shown to work in humans, when that's not always the case. For the studies that were done in animals or humans, I would also want to know how long were these clinical trials? Did they test just acute outcomes or also long-term outcomes? Who was included in this study population? Just so much more nuance is needed here. Okay, now back to the website. So in this section, he claims that he is in the top 1% for his chronological age of 46, and even in some regards for people 30 years his junior. The measures that he uses are listed here. This is great for him and his family. It goes without saying that to be healthy is a wonderful thing, but as someone with a research background, I cannot help but think about all the confounding factors when he says things like this. Is he in the top 1% because of the red light therapy? Or is it because he eats better than most people, exercises more than most people, and has more money than most people? Just the fact that he eats a lot of fruits and vegetables puts him ahead of 90% of Americans, because most people in this country do not eat enough fruits and vegetables. Most people also don't get enough exercise. Recent stats show that only 24% of American adults actually meet the weekly guidelines for cardio and strength training exercises. He also doesn't smoke or drink or eat any sort of refined foods. And on top of that, Bryan is also very wealthy. So those factors alone put him in the 1%. And I'm sure that he knows this too, because he advocates a lot for those basic things like eating healthy and exercising. But in essence, he's doing the basic things that are known to boost health and longevity, and he's doing a bunch of experimental stuff on top of those things. So if he lives to 125 years, how will we know if it's because he did full body focused shock therapy every day, or if it was because he actually followed the generic diet and exercise guidelines? We also don't know what role his genetics play. He could be at a genetic advantage or disadvantage for this whole longevity thing. The answer is that we won't know with this N of 1. All right, so making my way down the website, next I'm going to talk about the photo gallery. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with including photos of yourself. If you want to take off your clothes and do a naked photo shoot, that's your choice. My issue with the photo gallery is that I just don't understand what purpose it's supposed to serve. When I look at these photos, I just don't really know what I'm looking at. He is trying to halt the aging process both inside his body and on the outside, but at the same time, he has been open about doing cosmetic treatments. That makes it difficult to know if when you're looking at him, you're seeing the effects of his anti-aging protocol, or the effects of the cosmetic procedures that he's done. I respect his choice to do what makes him feel best about himself. Everyone has that right, but I do feel like this muddies the data that he publishes even further. I'm going to go over his posted outcomes for each region of his body next, but I'll just quickly list what he's already done or at least tested out. So he's done hair treatments, including an herb which changes his hair color, under eye treatments, face fat injections, which resulted in an allergic reaction, so was not continued, Sculptra, and veneers. So for me, it's just like, if the blueprint protocol can actually reverse aging, then let us see that. Show us that it works by letting it do its thing and not covering up any potential failings of the protocol. To me, it's like somebody telling me that they can fly and then they just get into a private jet. Any rich person can do that. Like, we're all watching to see if this guy can actually fly. And in this case, flying would be him waking up one day and actually looking just like his 18-year-old son, proving that he could really fully reverse his body's age. I think that the only way that he could justify doing cosmetic procedures would be to say that they're part of the blueprint protocol. But either way, I appreciate his honesty on this front. There are celebrities out there who do things to completely change their appearance, yet they will deny ever having done any sort of cosmetic procedure. So I like that he has chosen not to gaslight his audience. Okay, now let's take a closer look at the data that he has published about himself. He takes a ton of different measurements of different parts of his body from the microscopic level to the organ level. So I'm going to highlight the measurements that I found to be the most noteworthy. Please note that he does make adjustments to his protocol every so often. So depending on when you watch this video, you might see some differences between what I show here and what he's actually doing. This video is based on what was posted in February of 2025. So the first thing that struck me is that he is already biologically older than his chronological age in some ways. This doesn't necessarily reflect poorly on the protocol, I think, because he's only been doing it for a few years. And Bryan has also been open about not living the healthiest lifestyle prior to beginning the protocol. So it's expected that some areas of his body will reflect that. For example, under heart health, GI health, and air health, you can see that some measures are as old as 70 plus years old. The fact that some areas of his body are already aged the decades beyond his chronological age makes this protocol even less likely to work, in my opinion. And a major issue I have with this data is that some of it is muddied by the fact that he's done cosmetic procedures. So as I mentioned earlier, Bryan has been open about having had cosmetic procedures done on his hair, skin, and teeth. So I'll start with his hair. Hair loss and graying are not always about aging. People can lose their hair or start growing gray at a young age due to genetics. So those are not the most important markers of longevity, in my opinion. Still, we know that graying and thinning of hair generally do come along with old age, and they can make a person appear older. Bryan shared that he does not use traditional hair dye, but he does use a product called Miraki, which contains an herb that can change hair color. What's funny is just from looking at his hair and noticing that reddish tint, I already knew what the herb was because it's something that I use, and it's also very popular in Ayurvedic hair care. The herb is Lawsonia inermis, more commonly referred to as henna. He has noted that his hair follicles are still producing pigments, but there's no doubt in my mind that the henna coloring is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here when it comes to the way that his hair looks lately. Kudos to him for being transparent about this though. I'll also add that I think that his most recent haircut frames his face a lot better than his previous one, and I think that that also helps him to appear more youthful. Next, let's look at his skin. Now, I do not mean to be offensive at all, but some of these numbers honestly just do not make sense. Like age 10 for wrinkles and age 14 for texture. Like, I can look at him and tell that he does not have the skin of a preteen. His skin does look really nice and even, but he still looks his age in my opinion. Now, in terms of his oral health, no issues are listed, but he did choose to get veneers. So we are not able to get a clear picture of how his age reversal protocol affects his teeth. Okay, now I'm gonna switch gears and put on my public health hat. So I've already mentioned that scientifically, this research is tainted because there are too many concurrent interventions going on. Now, from Bryan's point of view, I can totally understand why he's doing it this way, because it's not like he can try one intervention, die, reincarnate himself, try another intervention, die again, reincarnate again, over and over until he's tried every single intervention one by one. We only get one shot at life, so he's putting everything that he can into this one go. And I respect that. Still, we would need clinical trials that focus on one intervention at a time to understand what really works and what might be harmful, as well as the magnitude of those effects. And this is precisely why, from a public health perspective, I don't feel like these experiments are really going to help the public at large. The average person will never be able to do even half of the experimental things that he's doing simply because of the cost and how time intensive they are. He is spending $2 million a year and a significant chunk of his waking hours on this protocol. Now, on the Jay Shetty podcast, he makes the claim that the protocol is not actually expensive and that it is actually accessible. Take a listen.
Really spent on the research and the measurement. And so the actual what I do day to day is very low cost. I'd say the majority of people can afford it. Most things are actually free.
$2 million isn't on the protocols, which we'll get to, But the 2 million is actually on the research and the measuring so that you can prove that the protocols work.
Exactly right.
So he's saying that it's the upfront costs and the repeat testing that costs millions, and that the daily protocols are not that expensive. Also, on his website, he has that the monthly cost of following the blueprint protocol is just $870, which I find to be wildly misleading. He works with a team of people to measure thousands of data points a week.
Doing this consistently, routinely, we do thousands of data points a week. And so I think it's just all these things adding up. It's just expensive to do the test, analyze the data, continually have that process. We need a large team to do it.
Who can afford to have a team of people working to measure their bodies on a weekly basis? Also, the upfront costs of some of his daily therapies are astronomical. In the 2025 longevity protocol video, he mentions using red and near-infrared light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and focused shockwave therapy, which is done by a technician. A full-body red light therapy machine can cost up to $18,000. A hyperbaric oxygen therapy tank costs at least $30,000 for a decent one, and the price can be higher. And focused shockwave therapy costs somewhere between $200 to $500 per session, depending on what part of the body you do it on. And he's doing it daily. So even if we go with the lower end of the cost range, that would be $200 times 365 days a year, or $73,000 per year. I should also mention that he has a whole clinic in his house with an ultrasound machine. I'll let you Google how much that one costs. Now, even when it comes to his fitness routine, there are some elements that are just out of reach for most people. So ignoring the fact that he has a personal gym and doesn't have to share with us normies, he also uses special machines like this one to stimulate his muscles. This is not something that you'll find at your local 24-hour fitness. Anyone trying to mimic his protocol would also need to be doing tons of testing and adjusting to make it work for their bodies, not just a blood panel. So it's disingenuous, in my opinion, to brush off all of the testing as something extra. The way he expresses himself sometimes, I get the impression that he thinks that his body can serve as the standard for everyone else. Like he can handle doing all the measurements and the rest of us would just need to follow the protocol that are based on studies done only on his body. This is flawed thinking. It's also ironic considering that this is the way that white male researchers used to think decades ago. Clinical trials that were designed to enhance our understanding of disease processes and the way that our bodies metabolize drugs used to only be done on white men, and women and minorities were assumed to just be variations of that standard. However, we now know that the same disease can manifest differently in women and men, that drugs may metabolize differently in female and male bodies, and that race can play a role in the prevalence of a disease. The point is that no single race or sex can serve as a prototype for everyone else on the planet. And this is why clinical trials with a diverse set of human beings are necessary. On the off chance that this protocol works for him and he ends up living longer than Jean Calment, the longest lived person ever who made it to 122 years and 164 days, it will only benefit people who are ultra wealthy and biologically similar to him. Like I said before, wealth already adds years to your life. So this money is basically going towards giving more years of life to the people who already live the longest. So from the perspective of wanting to do the most good for the public, I would much prefer to investigate how we can extend the lives of people who are dying too soon from preventable diseases and injuries. Let's talk about how this might play out in the United States. This may come as an uncomfortable surprise, but race is linked to longevity in the United States. On average, people of Asian descent have the longest average life expectancies of 85 years, followed by people who identify as Hispanic, white, and Black. Native Americans come in last place with a life expectancy of 68 years. That's a gap of 17 years between the people who live the longest in this country and the people with the shortest lifespans. Now, are there going to be genetic differences that give some people an advantage or a disadvantage? Of course. But I wouldn't chalk these differences up to just genetics because we know that there's more at play here. One of them is wealth. I know I keep bringing that up. I don't mean to be annoying. I only bring it up again and again because it's true. When we zoom out to global longevity statistics, income is not the only factor for understanding differences in longevity, but it is a crucial one. People in higher income countries generally live longer than people in low income countries. The Asian countries with the longest lived people also happen to be among the wealthier Asian countries. Also, Asian households are the wealthiest in this country. In 2022, they had an average family wealth of $1,800,000. White households are the second wealthiest with an average family wealth of $1,360,000, while the corresponding numbers for Hispanic and Black families are in the 200,000s. The lower life expectancies of Native Americans and Black Americans in this country are not just due to genetics and poverty though. A significant portion of what we are seeing are the cumulative effects of centuries of psychosocial and economic disparities that continue to impact those communities to this day. Major issues plaguing underserved Native American communities include insufficient healthcare funding, a lack of community healthcare workers, and poor access to fresh foods, including traditional Native American foods. Native American communities are also impacted severely by chronic diseases, homicide, and drug and alcohol abuse. It should also go without saying that centuries of systematic violence and abuse, starting with displacement, appropriation of their lands, genocide, forced sterilization, breaking up of families by putting Native American children into boarding schools so they could be better assimilated into whiteness, and loss of identity also have immeasurable psychological and economic impacts on this demographic of people. Moving on to the group with the second shortest life expectancy in this country, on average, Black Americans live 12 years less than Asian Americans. The exception to this rule is Manassas Park, Virginia, where the average life expectancy for Black people is 96 years. This is just one region of the US that was identified by the Black Progress Index to have higher life expectancies for Black people. Black people in this country live longer in communities where they have a higher median household income, higher rates of home ownership, and higher rates of entrepreneurship. Education, safety from gun violence, and having an intact family unit are also key. Helping shorter-lived communities to uplift themselves could look like providing funding to local organizations that are run by people from those communities who have a unique understanding of the challenges that those communities face. Those organizations could be ones that are designed to improve healthcare access, reduce gun violence, mentor at-risk youth, provide scholarships to children who cannot afford to get a good education, improve school systems from pre-K onwards, improve access to healthy food, and the list goes on. These types of organizations exist across the country and could do a lot with a $2 million a year budget. A couple other things I want to mention. Black women die from complications related to childbirth at a rate that is more than 2 times higher than the rates of women of other races. It would be nice to have more funding allocated to helping those women not die. The rate of death from prostate cancer among Black men is also more than 2 times that of men of other races. It would be cool to invest money into helping these sons and fathers and grandfathers not die. There is so much work to do to narrow the gaps in health outcomes between people in this country. That is a problem that deserves the attention of anyone whose mission it is to help people not die. What makes the fact that Bryan is spending so much of his wealth on himself even more interesting is that he himself has said that he really wants to help other people, this coming after he bore witness to how hard some people have it. This was after he traveled to Ecuador as a missionary with the Mormon Church when he was just 19 years old.
When I was 21, I just returned from the States after living in Ecuador for 2 years. And I lived
in Ecuador. Yeah.
Among extreme poverty, and I saw how these people lived and the challenges they had. And they didn't have a shot at life, and it changed how I understood myself, the world, my ambitions, what I wanted to do. And I came home and I decided that I wanted to become an entrepreneur, retire by 30, and then spend the rest of my life trying to improve people's lives.
I can't imagine that he is unaware of the life-extending effects that something as simple as access to proper healthcare can have for a person. Yet his desire to help the world with Blueprint seems to be more about him healing from his difficult past. If you say that you want to help the common man and you have millions of dollars lying around and there are known ways that you could be helping people, then why not use those methods instead of doing experiments on yourself that ultimately will not be useful to those people? But hey, at least he is not trying to meddle in government affairs. Even if he is just doing this ultimately for himself, at least he's not hurting anyone. He clearly just wants to be able to spend as much time as possible with his son Talmadge, and I don't think that that makes him a malevolent millionaire. I also want to point out that some of his money is going to causes that could contribute to the common good. So you've probably heard about Elon Musk's Neuralink, which is a brain interface technology company. Neuralink uses brain implants that are designed to pick up brain signals and send them to a computer. This allows the user to just think about something and then actually see that thing get done on the computer screen. As I was doing the research for this video, I learned that Bryan has a company that is doing something similar to this, with the major difference being that his company uses non-invasive technology. His company, Kernel, uses a helmet to measure changes in blood oxygen levels and thereby measure brain activity. These and other brain interface companies are developing technologies that could be used to restore functionality for people who have lost it due to degenerative conditions like ALS or spinal cord injuries. He also founded the OS Fund, which is a company that mainly provides funding to other biotechnology companies. companies. All right, so before I end this video, I want to share some other positive thoughts I had about this person. One thing I already mentioned that I really appreciate about him is his transparency. I wouldn't have been able to present a lot of the information that I did in this video if it was not for the fact that he is very open about everything that he is doing, including about things that a lot of people would probably choose to hide. He also seems to be a genuinely kind and sincere person. I know some people think that he's doing all this just for attention or for money, but I don't really get the sense that that's why he's doing it. I think he honestly believes in his mission. I also appreciate how disciplined he is. The blueprint protocol is extensive and takes up what looks like the majority of his day. That's a lot of time to spend on one thing, and he's been doing it for several years now. So that in and of itself is impressive. I also really like that he promotes sleep. Hustle culture seems to have lost some popularity in recent years, but there are still people out there who think that it's a badge of honor to not get enough sleep night after night, not realizing how bad it is for their health. Sleep is restorative and it should be treated as a priority, just like exercising and eating healthy. So I'm glad that he's putting this positive message out there. All right, so that brings me to the end of today's video. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share about Bryan Johnson and his blueprint protocol, please share them down below. Also, I want to know, do you think that he's actually going to make it to 125 years old? Do you think he's going to live forever? Or do you think all this is nonsense? And if so, tell us why. Remember to like the video and subscribe as well. Take care.